No rain, no welcome, no respect. After a long night serving his community, Snoop Dogg walked into one of the most luxurious hotels in Long Beach and was rejected. Not because there were no rooms, but because the manager didn't like how he looked. The next morning, that same manager would be unemployed. And Snoop? He'd be signing papers to own the entire building. But this story isn't just about revenge. It's about justice and what real power looks like when it walks quietly through the front door. The rain came down in heavy sheets over Long Beach, turning the city into a blur of shadows and reflections. A black Cadillac pulled up in front of the Imperial Grand Hotel, a place built to impress the kind of people who demand attention without asking for it. Snoop Dogg stepped out slowly, dressed in a bold blue and gold tracksuit with a paisley pattern that shimmered under the streetlights. Gold chains swayed over his chest, and his presence was unmistakable. He didn't try to blend in. He never did. But tonight, he wasn't looking for a stage. He was just looking for rest. Inside, the lobby was spotless and cold. The kind of cold that wasn't about temperature, it was about tone. White marble floors, curated art, and the kind of silence that judged you before you even spoke. Behind the front desk, Brandon, the hotel manager, was tapping on his phone. Tall, polished, and sharply dressed, he didn't even look up when Snoop approached. "Good evening," Snoop said calmly. Brandon finally glanced up, his eyes scanning Snoop from head to toe. Tracksuit. Chains, skin. "We're fully booked," he said flatly, his tone leaving no room for warmth. Snoop raised an eyebrow. "No rooms at all?" he asked, still polite. Brandon put on a show, typing something into the computer, sighing with exaggerated effort. "No availability. Not tonight." He didn't smile, didn't apologize. He didn't even pretend to care. "You're welcome to try somewhere else," he added, voice dipped in passive authority. It wasn't just a denial, it was a dismissal, the kind that doesn't need to raise its voice to insult you. Snoop didn't react, not yet, but a part of him quietly filed that moment away, like a verse he'd return to later. Then another hotel employee approached Brandon and whispered something in his ear. Brandon leaned slightly to listen, glanced back at Snoop and rolled his eyes just enough to be seen. "Oh, you're that rapper guy, huh?" he said with a half-smirk. "Didn't recognize you under all that blue." It was a jab dressed as small talk. Snoop gave a faint smile, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. "Don't worry," he said. "You weren't supposed to." He turned and walked away without waiting for a reply, leaving behind the heavy silence of someone who'd just been dismissed for being himself. As Snoop reached the door, it swung open for two white couples laughing loudly, designer bags in hand. No reservations, no questions. Brandon greeted them like royalty. "Welcome! You're in luck. We've got just the suites for you." Champagne glasses appeared from nowhere. Room keys were handed over with glowing smiles. Snoop paused outside under the awning and watched the scene through the rain-smeared glass. There it was. No more denial. No room meant no room for people like him. The lie had been exposed without a single word needing to be said. Across the street, a warm light spilled from a corner restaurant. Snoop crossed slowly, entered, and took a seat by the window. The air inside smelled of fresh coffee and toasted bread. A young server brought him a mug of ginger tea without being asked. No selfies, no forced recognition, just kindness. Snoop pulled out his phone and stared at the Imperial Grand through the rain. Then he made a single call. "Carter, Rachel, we're buying that hotel, tonight." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It carried the weight of someone who knew exactly what kind of justice the morning would bring. Inside the warm corner restaurant, Snoop sat near the window, watching the Imperial Grand like a man watching a house he used to live in burn slowly. The server returned with ginger tea, placing it gently in front of him. "Rough night?" he asked, not out of pity, but with quiet understanding. Snoop gave a soft nod, eyes still on the hotel across the street. Just another reminder, he said. Some doors were never built for us to walk through until we build our own. From his table, he had a perfect view of the lobby, and what he saw next removed any lingering doubt. Within the hour, 3 more groups arrived, all white, none with visible reservations. Brandon, now energized, greeted them with warm smiles, handshakes, and even jokes. "You're lucky. We just had a few last-minute cancellations," he said, guiding them toward the check-in desk. Snoop watched as champagne flutes were passed, luggage was whisked away, and room keys were handed out like candy. The earlier, fully booked claim was officially a lie. But this wasn't just about rooms. It was about who gets welcomed and who gets warned. Snoop didn't need revenge. He needed precision, and he already knew what came next. He opened his phone and snapped a few discreet photos through the window, not for social media, for documentation. His lawyer, Carter, was already awake, reviewing clauses. Rachel Green, his investment manager, had begun quietly contacting the hotel's parent company. The Imperial Grand wasn't owned by itself. It was a struggling asset within a larger chain, barely staying afloat. The building had tax issues, employee lawsuits, and a growing file of complaints related to, unsurprisingly, discriminatory practices. A quiet, all-cash offer would be hard to refuse, especially overnight. Especially from someone who doesn't miss when he moves. Across the street, something else caught Snoop's eye. A young black couple entered the hotel, well-dressed, polite, with a printed reservation in hand. Brandon greeted them differently. His smile was gone, his shoulders squared. "Reservation or not, we have no rooms," he said flatly. The man tried to explain. The woman pointed to her phone. Brandon didn't even look at it. "You're welcome to try somewhere more." "Inflexible," he added. Snoop leaned forward slightly, his tea untouched. Same place, same lie, different targets, but this time he wouldn't let them walk away thinking they were the problem. Snoop stood up from the table and walked across the street with quiet purpose. The couple had just been turned away and were standing near the curb, trying to order a rideshare. Snoop approached and handed the man a sleek black card with gold lettering, "Open Doors Initiative." "Come back tomorrow morning," he said. "Show this at the front desk." The couple looked confused. "Sorry, who are you?" the man asked. Snoop just gave a small smile. "Let's just say, I'm about to open more than just doors." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving behind the seeds of something they wouldn't fully understand until morning. Back inside the restaurant, the mood hadn't changed, but Snoop had. He sat again, quietly scrolling through contracts Rachel had sent over. The phone buzzed with a message. "Offer ready." "They're reviewing. We'll have an answer within the hour." He leaned back in his chair, took a sip of tea, and looked up at the hotel. The sign still read Imperial Grand, still glowing like a promise made to the wrong people, but that glow would mean something different soon. "Let them sleep easy tonight," he whispered to himself. "The morning's gonna wake them up." The restaurant was nearly empty now. The saxophone player had packed up, and only the soft clinking of dishes echoed in the distance. Snoop sat alone, bathed in the dim light from the window, reviewing every clause Rachel had sent. His fingers moved slowly over the paper, but his mind was already steps ahead. The acquisition wasn't just about ownership. It was about legacy. It was about correcting something the world had learned to tolerate. The silence around him wasn't heavy. It was focused. The kind of silence that comes before something big shifts, like the moment just before a wave crashes. Across the table, his phone buzzed again. Rachel's message lit up the screen. "They're interested. Board's convening now. We'll have confirmation before sunrise." Snoop didn't smile. He didn't react. He just nodded to himself and continued reviewing the documents, highlighting sections with a pen. Outside the window, the Imperial Grand stood tall, unaware that its fate was no longer in its own hands. For a building that made people feel small, it was about to be taught what real power looks like, and how quietly it can arrive when carried by intention. At 3:19 a.m., Carter called in. "They're greenlighting it. All cash, no press. Transfer by 5 a.m. Snoop leaned back in the booth, eyes fixed on the hotel across the street. "Make sure it's airtight," he said. "And Rachel gets first oversight on operations. I want policy reform written into the transition agreement." Carter chuckled softly. "You're not just buying a building, you're rebuilding a system." Snoop didn't laugh. "Exactly." His voice stayed level, but the weight of that word, exactly, landed like a verdict. This wasn't just business. It was correction. It was restoration. At 3:48 a.m., Snoop left the restaurant. The air outside smelled of wet pavement and something else. Change. He stepped into a black SUV that pulled up quietly. Inside, waiting on the seat, was the final version of the purchase agreement. He flipped through the pages one more time, initialed each section, then signed. The pen's movement was slow, deliberate, ceremonial. This was bigger than a signature. It was a reversal. A silent answer to every door that had ever been slammed shut in someone's face simply for who they were. As the SUV cruised slowly back toward the hotel, the city still slept. But for Snoop, the night was alive with purpose. No press, no entourage, just action. In the quiet cabin of the car, he stared out the window at the passing streets. Each light post, each empty sidewalk, felt like a reminder of how often people are left in the dark, and how easy it is to bring light when you stop waiting for permission. He didn't need to make a statement. The moment he walked back into that lobby would be the statement. By 4:52 a.m., the car stopped in front of the Imperial Grand once again. The street was still wet. The sky had softened from black to a deep indigo. Snoop stepped out, dressed in a tailored black suit, no chains, no flash. Just presence. Carter joined him, holding the legal documents in a sleek leather folder. A bodyguard stood silently behind them. They walked together across the same marble floor that had tried to belittle him hours earlier. Behind the front desk, Brandon looked up, still in charge, still smug, for now. Back in Dallas, the headquarters of the hotel's parent company was buzzing, at least for a few select people. Rachel's offer hit their inboxes like lightning in the dark. A full cash acquisition, no financing delays, and immediate relief from mounting debt. The Imperial Grand had become a liability over the past 2 years. Lawsuits over staff conduct, complaints of racial profiling, and outdated branding that no longer resonated with modern travelers. This deal was a lifeline disguised as a quiet exit. No press, no statements, just a clean break. And for them, it was perfect. For Snoop, it was just the beginning. Meanwhile, inside the Imperial Grand, Brandon strutted through the lobby like a king in his castle. He stopped occasionally to flirt with the new concierge, joke with the security guards, and mock guests behind their backs. To his staff, he wasn't a leader. He was a warning. But tonight, none of them pushed back. Why would they? Brandon had been protected for years. His behavior wasn't an accident. It was a reflection of the system he thrived in. What he didn't know was that this would be his last night walking through those halls with that smirk on his face. At 3:47 a.m., Carter received the final green light. Contract signed. Payment confirmed. Transfer filed. From that moment, the Imperial Grand Hotel legally belonged to Calvin Broadus, better known as Snoop Dogg. Carter texted the team, "It's done." Rachel immediately sent out directives to prepare for the ownership shift. This wasn't just a transaction. This was a pivot point. The kind you read about in case studies years later, but the press wouldn't cover it, at least not yet. This wasn't for headlines. It was for the people who've been turned away quietly for far too long. Back in the SUV, Snoop reviewed a checklist sent by Rachel. He didn't skip a single item. Every decision was intentional. Retention of frontline staff, removal of discriminatory leadership, implementation of cultural sensitivity training, and a top-to-bottom audit of hiring practices. His goal wasn't revenge, it was redemption for the hotel, for the staff who'd been overlooked, and for every person who had ever walked in and been made to feel small. The operation had to be surgical, quick, clean, symbolic. By the time the sun rose, the hotel's soul would start to shift. At 4:30 a.m., he returned to the restaurant just to pick up the signed documents that had been printed and bound on site. The same waiter from earlier was cleaning up. "You're still here?" he asked. Snoop nodded. "Some nights aren't made for sleep," he said, slipping the folder under his arm. The waiter looked curious but didn't press. Snoop handed him a thick envelope as a tip. Inside was a donation pledge, enough to keep his mother's small food truck dream alive. Even in moments of personal victory, Snoop never forgot to reach back. That's how change sustains itself. By 4:55 a.m., the SUV rolled once more to the Imperial Grand's front entrance. The sky was just beginning to shift from deep blue to the first hues of morning. Snoop stepped out with Carter at his side. No crowd, no noise, just gravity. The doors opened automatically as they approached. This time he didn't need to ask for a room. This time he was coming for the whole building. And Brandon, still behind the front desk, feet up on a low cabinet, sipping coffee like he owned the place, had no idea that he'd already been fired. He just hadn't been told yet. The automatic doors whooshed open as Snoop entered the Imperial Grand with quiet, controlled steps. He wore a tailored suit, understated but powerful, the kind that didn't scream money, it whispered legacy. Carter walked beside him, holding the legal documents like a sword sheathed in leather. The early morning light streamed in behind them, making their silhouettes cut clean through the marble floor's reflection. Brandon, feet still propped up, glanced up lazily until his eyes locked with Snoop's. In that instant, something shifted in his posture. The coffee cup froze mid-air. The grin slid from his face. Snoop stopped directly in front of the front desk, looked Brandon dead in the eyes, and laid the folder down. Carter opened it, revealing signed contracts, certified ownership papers, and a cover letter addressed to Imperial Grand staff. Effective immediately, this property is under new ownership and executi. A V direction. Brandon reached for the papers with shaking hands, his eyes darting between the names and signatures. "What is this?" he asked, voice cracking slightly. Carter didn't hesitate. "This is your final notice. You're no longer the general manager of this hotel." Silence slammed into the lobby like a dropped weight. Snoop spoke for the first time since walking in. His voice was calm but heavy with authority. "You said last night that it didn't matter who I was." He paused, eyes never leaving Brandon. "Turns out it does, but not because I'm famous." "Because I don't forget," Brandon stammered, trying to defend himself, something about protocol, guest demographics, confusion. But Snoop raised a hand to stop him. "Save it," he said. "You weren't protecting the hotel. You were protecting a system built to keep people like me outside its walls. That system ends now." Employees began filtering into the lobby, drawn by the voices and the growing tension. Among them was Angela, a long-time staff member who had worked at the hotel for nearly 2 decades without once being considered for promotion. She stood off to the side, watching with wide eyes. Snoop noticed her and turned. "Angela," he said, "you've been holding this place together behind the scenes. You know the team. You know the guests. And more than anyone, you know what respect feels like because you've gone without it for too long. Starting today, you're the new general manager." Gasps filled the lobby. Angela covered her mouth, her eyes welling up. "You're serious?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Snoop nodded, smiling softly. "I've never been more serious about anything." The staff broke into scattered applause, some in shock, others smiling as if years of silent frustration had just been lifted. Angela stepped forward and shook his hand, then embraced him, not as a celebrity, but as someone who finally saw her. Meanwhile, Brandon stood frozen, his authority erased in front of the very people he used to control. His security badge was collected, and he was quietly escorted out of the building. Outside, the morning sun finally broke over the rooftops, lighting the hotel's white facade with golden clarity. The Imperial Grand was still standing, but it was no longer the same. Snoop turned back toward the lobby and took a seat on one of the modern leather couches, the same one he had stood in front of just hours earlier. He looked around and said quietly, more to himself than anyone else, "Funny how a place can feel brand new, without changing a single wall. All it takes is changing who's welcome." The power didn't come from owning the building. It came from rewriting its soul. Angela wasted no time stepping into her new role. Just hours after the handover, she called an all-staff meeting in the hotel's main conference room. The same employees who had once tiptoed through shifts under Brandon's rule now sat upright, alert, unsure of what to expect. Snoop stood quietly near the back, watching it unfold like a proud mentor. Angela took a breath and stepped forward. "This place used to be run by fear and favoritism," she said, her voice clear. "That ends now. We're not just changing who's in charge, we're changing what leadership means." The transformation began immediately, not loud but impossible to miss. The lobby, once cold and sterile, now displayed new artwork from local creatives whose pieces told stories of struggle, pride, and resilience. The restaurant's menu expanded to include bold, flavorful dishes that felt like home-cooked memories served on fine china. The staff dress code was reimagined to allow for self-expression without sacrificing professionalism. Nothing was forced. Everything had purpose. It wasn't about tearing down the past. It was about adding soul to a place that had forgotten what that meant. Snoop showed up every morning, not to oversee, but to be present. He walked the hallways like he'd always belonged there, and now he truly did. He spoke with housekeepers like they were partners, checked in with maintenance before they checked out rooms. One young front desk clerk admitted privately, "We were told to avoid certain types of guests." Subtly, but it was clear. Snoop leaned in and said calmly, "Then let's make it clear what hospitality really means. Nobody should walk through these doors and feel like they don't belong. It wasn't a threat, it was a reset." Angela brought in leadership coaches to work with the team, not to teach them how to perform diversity, but to help them understand people. The staff began sharing stories, moments they had stayed silent, times they'd been dismissed, the pressure of smiling while feeling invisible. Some cried, others apologized, but something shifted. They weren't just employees anymore. They were a team. For the first time, people looked each other in the eyes when they spoke. Respect wasn't demanded from the top. It was rising from the ground up. Guests noticed. Online reviews started shifting within days. You can feel the warmth the second you step inside. It's not just a hotel, it's a heartbeat. I came for the ocean view, but I stayed for how this place made me feel. The staff moved with confidence. Dense. Laughter returned to break rooms. Employees started staying after their shifts, not because they had to, but because they felt part of something bigger. The Imperial Grand didn't lose its luxury. It gained its humanity. One night, as Angela wrapped up a late meeting, Snoop passed by the office. He didn't say much. Just nodded at her, then turned down the hallway. She smiled to herself, not because of the power she now held, but because of how she earned it. And as Snoop disappeared into the quiet corridor, it was clear This place was no longer run by fear, silence, or status. It was run by people. The kind who know exactly what it feels like to be overlooked, and who'd never let that happen again. The change wasn't just structural, it was spiritual. Within a week, the hotel felt like it had been reawakened. The walls no longer echoed silence, but life. Where cold, generic decor once dominated, now hung stories. Local artists filled the space with paintings that felt alive, colors that spoke of resilience, detail that invited reflection. Guests stopped to stare, not because they were impressed, but because they were moved. The space felt less like a hotel and more like a living message. Everyone belongs here. The restaurant, once known for its overpriced, tasteless elegance, was reborn. Its new menu didn't follow trends, it followed memory. Dishes inspired by comfort, heritage, and community replaced the soulless luxury plating. You could order gumbo with a glass of red wine or fried plantains next to a filet mignon. It wasn't fusion. It was freedom. Guests began requesting recipes. Strangers shared tables and the kitchen. It started sounding like laughter, not orders. Even the staff started eating together after shifts, something unthinkable before. Angela launched something called Guest Stories. Every week, one guest would be invited to share their story, about their journey, a challenge they overcame, or someone who changed their life. The story would be featured in the hotel's welcome newsletter and displayed on a board near the elevators. Snoop's idea. "Let the walls talk," he said. "Let people see each other beyond their luggage." It started as a quiet experiment, but within a month it became a signature of the hotel. Guests came not just for rest, they came to be seen. But the most powerful change happened behind the scenes. Staff, who had once hidden parts of themselves, their background, their identity, their voice, began standing taller. One housekeeper, Rosa, started a Spanish-speaking guest service initiative. A former bellhop, Marcus, launched a mentorship program for youth interested in hospitality. These weren't corporate decisions, they were human ones. And under Angela's leadership, they weren't just welcomed, they were funded. That was the shift. No longer asking permission to matter. Snoop stayed in the background most days, walking the halls, shaking hands, giving nods instead of speeches. He didn't need credit. The change was speaking for itself. Once he paused in front of a hallway painting and just stared. The painting showed two children, one black, one white, sitting on hotel steps, sharing a sandwich. Underneath it read, "It's not about the steps you climb, it's about who sits beside you." A quiet smile crossed his face. That, he thought, is the kind of message no front desk policy could ever fake. And the numbers, they followed the soul. Occupancy rates hit new highs. Guest satisfaction soared to 95%. But that wasn't the victory. The victory was that people left changed. They came in as strangers. They left with stories. The Imperial Grand was no longer just a hotel. It had become something rare, a place where justice wasn't just in the paperwork. It was in the air, in every detail, in every eye contact that said, "You matter here." 2 weeks after the ownership transfer, something unexpected appeared on the hotel's website. A single-page announcement titled, "Open Doors." No press release, no flashy video. Just a simple message. This hotel doesn't just serve guests. It serves purpose. Beneath it, a short list of new initiatives. Free weekly meals for unhoused residents, hospitality training for at-risk youth, and financial literacy workshops hosted in the hotel. Event rooms, all under a new banner, the Open Doors Foundation. Snoop hadn't just changed the hotel, he was turning it into a vehicle for community dignity. Angela was named executive coordinator of the foundation alongside her general manager duties. She walked through the lobby one morning and paused at the sight of folding chairs being arranged in one of the meeting rooms. "Who's coming today?" she asked. A volunteer replied, group of teens from the shelter. First session on how to present yourself for job interviews. She smiled, then whispered, imagine if this existed back when we were their age. The hotel was no longer just a place to check in. It had become a place to restart. On Sundays, the Imperial Grand no longer closed its kitchen early. Instead, the staff stayed late to prepare hot meals. The same waiters who once served overpriced champagne now offered bowls of stew and fresh bread to people who had slept outside the night before, but no one was pitied. They were greeted, seated, and served with full dignity, no different than any guest in a suite. Snoop sometimes walked the floor during these meals, dressed low-key, exchanging smiles, asking names, not to be seen, but to listen. You can't heal a city from above, he once said. You do it table by table. What about you? Have you ever been judged or overlooked, only to come back stronger than ever? Share your story in the comments. Someone needs to hear it. If you believe in second chances and building something better, drop a like. It helps this story reach more people. And if this kind of message speaks to you, subscribe. We tell true stories about justice, dignity, and transformation. Every week, back at the hotel, the foundation's impact rippled beyond the building itself. Local businesses began donating supplies. Retired teachers volunteered to teach resume writing. A jazz musician offered to mentor young performers. It was as if the hotel had become a magnet for people who wanted to give, but never had a place to do it, and Snoop made sure it stayed that way. No velvet ropes here, he told Angela. We don't build walls, we build doors. And we keep them open. Some guests, unaware of the changes, asked at check-in, why are there so many community flyers in the lobby? The concierge would simply reply, because here, luxury and perp those live in the same room. It wasn't just branding, it was reality. Snoop didn't just redesign a hotel, he rewrote its values. And in doing so, he started something that couldn't be undone. Still, a few on the team noticed he was preparing something more, something personal, something unfinished. Angela could feel it in the way he looked at the staff board sometimes, like a loop that hadn't closed. What no one expected was who would walk through those same lobby doors next. Someone from the beginning, someone whose story hadn't ended, just paused. It was a rainy Tuesday morning, poetic almost, when the front desk received a visitor no one expected. Brandon. He stood outside for a few seconds before walking in, dressed in plain work clothes, no suit, no swagger. The lobby he once ruled now felt unfamiliar. The artwork, the music, even the smell, it all screamed transformation. Angela saw him first and froze. Staff nearby turned and fell into silence. There was no announcement. Just presence. And tension. He walked slowly to the front counter, hands in his pockets, not asking for a room, just asking for a moment. Angela approached him carefully, shoulders squared, but heart steady. "What are you doing here, Brandon?" she asked, keeping her tone neutral. He nodded once, then spoke softly. "I don't expect anything. I've been thinking about everything. Watching from a distance, and I realized the problem was never the policy. It was me." He paused, looking down. "I was protecting a culture that only ever protected itself, and I hurt people for it. You, the guests, myself." It wasn't a speech. It was surrender. Snoop walked in from the east hallway just then. He'd heard Brandon was back. He didn't rush over, didn't flinch. Just stood there letting the silence hold. Brandon turned, expecting resistance, maybe even humiliation, but Snoop didn't offer either. "You came back," he said. Brandon nodded, eyes red. "Not to get my job back, just to say I was wrong." Another long silence, then Snoop stepped closer. "You were more than wrong," he said. "You led with pride, not principle. But you're here. That counts for something? Angela looked at Snoop, unsure. The staff behind her waited for direction. Snoop turned to her, then back to Brandon. "We don't do pity here," he said. "But we believe in redemption. Everyone deserves a second shot, just not the same role." He paused. "Maintenance crew is short-staffed, low profile, hard work. Starts tomorrow if you want it. You earn your way back, from the ground up, like everyone else." Brandon blinked, processing it, then he nodded. "That's more than fair." Angela handed him a clipboard. "Orientation is at 6 a.m. Sharp. No smiles, no ceremony, just structure." Brandon took it, gave a quiet "thank you," and walked toward the employee wing. As he disappeared down the hallway, the staff exchanged glances, some surprised, others unsure. But no one objected. The tone had been set. Not everyone deserved a second chance. But some people fought for it. And sometimes that fight started with walking through the same door they once slammed on someone else. Later that night, Snoop sat in the rooftop lounge, watching the rain blur the city lights. Carter joined him for a quiet drink. "You sure about bringing him back?" he asked. Snoop didn't answer right away. Then, "He doesn't need punishment, he needs process. Let the work change him, like it changed this place." They clinked glasses once, then sat in silence. The storm outside had passed. Inside, something else was clearing too. 3 months later, the Imperial Grand looked completely different, not just in decor, but in energy. The staff walked with pride, guests left with purpose, and on one unforgettable Saturday night, the hotel hosted its first-ever redemption gala. It wasn't about celebrities or red carpets, though both were present. It was about legacy. The ballroom was filled with community leaders, artists, former guests, and volunteers. Jazz floated through the air. Laughter danced between tables. For the first time in years, the Imperial Grand wasn't trying to impress. It was finally expressing something real. Angela stood at the front of the room, now fully in her element. Her speech wasn't rehearsed, it was remembered. "I used to clock in here invisible," she said. "Now I get to see people and be seen. That's what leadership looks like." The applause was loud and long, not because of who she was, but because of what she'd done. She didn't build an empire. She rebuilt a culture, one rooted in care, humility, and earned respect. When she stepped down from the podium, she didn't need a spotlight. The people were her light. Then came Snoop. No fanfare. No grand entrance. Just a mic, a steady walk, and the weight of everything that had led to this moment. "This place turned me away," he began. "But instead of burning it down, we lit it up. With purpose, with community, with people who deserved more than policies and polite lies." He paused, letting the room breathe. "See, real power doesn't flex. It lifts. It doesn't silence. It listens, and it never ever judges by appearance, only by heart." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of respect, of agreement, of truth. Brandon stood at the back of the room, wearing a crisp maintenance uniform. He didn't want a seat. He didn't want a moment. He just wanted to witness it. And when Snoop spotted him, their eyes met. No words exchanged, just a nod. The kind that says, "You're on the right path, keep walking." That moment hit harder than any confrontation ever could. Because real transformation doesn't happen under pressure. It happens in process, one humble step at a time. As the night unfolded, guests shared stories of how the hotel had impacted them. A couple who got married there after meeting at a free community dinner. A teen who landed his first job thanks to the foundation's training. A former guest who now worked at the front desk. Every story echoed the same truth. The Imperial Grand had gone from being a symbol of exclusion to a sanctuary of second chances. and that made it priceless. Snoop ended the night with one final line. No script, no slogan, just a truth that hung in the air like a promise. This building used to measure people by status. Now we measure by soul. As applause filled the room and lights dimmed, the story closed, not with an ending, but with a beginning. One hotel, one choice. And a ripple effect that would stretch far beyond its walls. Not every story ends with a win, but this one did. Not because someone got even, but because someone chose to lead differently. Snoop didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam doors. He opened them. For people like Angela, for kids looking for a second shot, even for someone like Brandon. Because real justice doesn't just flip the script, it rewrites the system. Have you ever wished someone would give you a second chance? Or wished you had given one to someone else? Share it in the comments. You never know who's reading or who needs to hear it. If this story moved you, hit that like button. It's a small act, but it helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them. And if you believe in stories that expose injustice, restore dignity, and flip the power back to those who deserve it, subscribe now. The next story is already on its way, and you don't want to miss it.